I realized I'm not autistic and I'm not ADHD. I have both. I am AuADHD. I'm just a walking contradiction.
Well, tell us more about Project Fluency. I think it'd be helpful to understand what it actually is and how it works.
So for me, it was a case of looking at productivity support for one, and then looking at wellness support. You would need to have different apps to cover all of the support that you would get from those areas. And being neurodivergent, you're just not going to do that. It's just not feasible. And I think that's where a lot of these apps kind of go wrong. And that's where the initial idea came from. And other people are saying that they would use this as well, then there's maybe something there. And one of the key things I was taught in therapy, if something doesn't exist, go and make it yourself.
Today's guest is Ross Heatley, founder of Project Fluency, an AI-powered platform that helps people who are often misunderstood, whether due to neurodivergence or communication style. It offers a personalized AI that helps users with task management and goal tracking for self-advocacy and reflection. Let's get into the episode. Hey, it's Steve. Real quick before we begin, the single biggest thing I've learned about succeeding as an ADHD entrepreneur is that everything boils down to mastering your weeks. So if ADHD is making business harder than it needs to be, I've got something that can help. Grab my free weekly ADHD dashboard. It's a free, simple, but powerful tool to help you stay focused, organized, and in control of your week. The link is in the description below. Hey there, and welcome. Steve August here with another episode of ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator. So glad you decided to join us today. And today I have another amazing guest. His name is Ross Heatley. And Ross is a twice exceptional AuADHD and giftedness founder, working on an app designed specifically for neurodiverse brains called Project Fluency. He has previously worked as an HR advisor before taking the big step into entrepreneurship and utilizing his ability to create spaces for people and transforming this into a digital support system. So really excited to have you here today. Welcome, Ross. How are you today?
Hi, Steve. Yeah, not too bad, thank you. How about yourself?
Doing well. Where in the world do we find you today?
So I'm blessed to be born in Newcastle upon Tyne in England, northeast of England. Yeah,
All right.
lovely
Awesome.
weather outside today.
Yeah. You've got some famous musicians out of Newcastle, Sting, of course, but I also understand Sam Fender is out of Newcastle as well.
He is indeed, yes. The last few sort of big gigs that he's done at our football stadium at St. James's Park. So I was lucky to be able to attend one of those a few years ago. I actually on the night he actually brought out AC/DC to do a couple of songs live, which was so unexpected. So yeah, that was a magical moment for sure. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I did not expect the words AC/DC to come out as one of, because I know he's a big Bruce Springsteen fan, and does amazing covers of like Dancing in the Dark, but I didn't realize there was an AC/DC connection as well. He's just fabulous. I mean, that song 17 Going Under is just one of the great songs ever written. And
Fantastic. Yeah. I love that he draws a lot of his inspiration from living in Newcastle and being in the Northeast. And he's a great representative, I think. Yeah, it's definitely an inspiration.
Yeah, awesome. Well, great to be talking music with you, but let's also let's get to the topic at hand. Tell us more about what you're working on, and how you came to it.
So what I quite like about this story, I've been thinking about it quite a bit, sort of leading up to this session today. A lot of my own personal experience on my kind of neurodivergent journey, and the sort of the reason why Project Fluency came to fruition, they're very intrinsically linked. Um, Growing up, I wasn't actually flagged as being neurodivergent. The only thing I was labeled as was being gifted. So, for a long time, I battled with that concept of, well, I'm clearly, bright, intelligent. Why am I struggling? Why can't I sit down and revise? Why can't I do these things that everyone else seems to be able to do? I was being pushed by teachers at school to apply to Cambridge to go and study law. That was my original goal in life. And then, unfortunately, that comes with a lot of work that I just wasn't prepared for. I didn't have the tools, didn't have the support to really be able to achieve those goals. That was you know, a weight really that I carried in a lot of life. Um, my role as a HR advisor, I was unfortunately, I was giving support to people who were neurodivergent or, were culturally diverse as well, for example. And I was just saying that a lot of the support that we had just wasn't hitting the mark. It was one size fits all. It was all of that information as well. So it just didn't quite, it didn't give the support that people who are neurodiverse, who aren't, you know, um, one way, it just wasn't meeting their sort of standards and their needs. I went through my own um, discovery with my own neurodivergence. For me, I had suspected I might be autistic, um, but when I looked at assessment criteria, I didn't really meet the full criteria. I'd never really considered being ADHD before, even though growing up, all of my report cards from school were things like finish his work first and then distract everybody else. Typical kind of ADHD sort of behaviors and hallmarks, but it was never picked up because, as I say, I got on with the work and I got good grades and I did everything like that. So when it came to my own kind of light bulb moment, um, it was because I was failing in work. I
Mm.
was I was going through a lot of therapy at the time to process some childhood trauma that was taking a real toll on me as a person. I was staying in work, the high pressure job, pushing through. I hadn't had any time off work really to be able to kind of process the things that I was going through. And it all kind of came to a head at once. So um, I had to take a step back from that job, and that was probably one of the best things for me because that space provided clarity. You know, um, it was very much was a light bulb moment. I realized I'm not autistic and I'm not ADHD. I have both. I am AuADHD, and that's why I never felt like I'd fit in to either sort of slot, to be honest. Um, and then that kind of, you know, what support do I need? The
Hmm.
support just doesn't quite exist yet. And one of the key things I was taught in therapy, if something doesn't exist, go and make it yourself.
Yeah.
You know,
Love that.
so that for me was just something that all the pieces kind of started to fall into place, as I say, and you know, it very much became a step back and a kind of a holistic view at the problem at large. And that's kind of where Project Fluency, the sort of the birthplace of that essentially started from there.
I want to hear about Project Fluency more in depth, but I also want to go back. I think there's some important stuff in there where you said you didn't feel like you fit into either bucket, but there were things, from ADHD and things from autism that were both present for you. I was just curious because I think a lot of people have this overlap, right, of these traits. And I was just curious for you, what were the things like that you said, okay, that's ADHD, and then you went to these, but then you said the other part of it is, okay, these probably are autism. I'm just curious for you, what were some of, one of the specific things that you encountered that caused you to notice that you were, hey, I've been blessed with both.
Yeah, it's great because obviously we have the autistic side, the ADHD side, but then there's also the giftedness side as well on top.
Mm-hmm.
Being twice exceptional, being 2E, um, and then so being 2E and then being AuADHD, I'm just a walking contradiction, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest.
So 2E is a term that some of our American listeners probably aren't familiar with, but I have a feeling
Okay,
yeah. So what does 2E mean?
so it means twice exceptional.
Okay.
So
Oh,
it
okay.
it
I got
means
you
that
now.
it means that you have two exceptionalities. So
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergence and giftedness,
Mm-hmm.
tends to be the sort of the makeup of it. A lot of the support that's out there really is focused specifically for children who are twice exceptional. But twice exceptional children grow up to be twice exceptional adults. There just
Yeah.
seems to be a real cut off of support at that stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, ADHD, one of my favorite stories, probably something incredibly relatable. I went into a drawer to grab a t-shirt, and I was running really low on t-shirts, and I picked up a sort of an older one, had a hole in it. I thought, "Oh, I'll just wear this, that's fine." I put it on, turned around, and on my bed was a clean box of washing that I'd done. I just
Hmm.
hadn't put it away.
Sure.
You know, very sort of object permanence, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The wonderful
Working
joys
memory
of that.
deficit kind of stuff.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
100%. All that sort of fun stuff. The autistic side, I love repetition.
Hmm.
I'll listen to a song on repeat to death. I'll have the same food on repeat to death. There's all that sort of stuff. There is the sort of the sometimes the social awareness, I think, as well, the masking and all that sort of stuff. So I think these days especially there is such an overlap between ADHD and autism. I think more people are starting to become aware of that overlap. Um, but the giftedness on top as well. Some of the social issues. I don't necessarily struggle with, and I think that's a combination of giftedness and trauma. Unfortunately, I've kind of had to learn how to be able to read people. So some of that deficit that you tend to see in autistic people, I don't really have that. Um, but most conversations just come with a higher energy cost anyway, because I'm seeing all of the variables. I'm picking up on the subtle shifts in people's body language and, their micro expressions, that sort of stuff. So it's great to have that awareness, and, but then again, it creates that sort of duality almost of, um, well, I can do all these things, so why am I being held back by some of the other things? It kind of creates that dissonance almost. Um, and a kind of going back to school, and that sort of, I've got the capability to do all these things, so why can't I just sit down and revise? And that in itself creates a shame, especially when you don't know that you are neurodivergent. You don't know that you have these differences.
Yeah, because I think this is very relatable to a lot of you. This is certainly my story. And I went through like 54 years or so of
You don't look at you at 53, to be honest.
thank you. That's good. I'm 57, so I'm still winning. Uh,
Well, there you go.
but what age and what was the inflection point that got you to like, okay, this isn't just, a typical kind of like, I think what happens is we think of it as a character flaw. Like that's our first place we go to because that's the message generally we'll get is like, hey, we have this brilliance. We have these ideas. We have the part of our brain that's really good at the thinking and creating and, analyzing and creating connection, really well developed. And then, but there's this kind of like continual misfire when we go to execute, go to make good on that brilliance. And so there's usually some sort of inflection point where we get to where, and this is usually the low point of the story where then when we start climbing back up. But what was that moment for you where you went from, okay, why is this happening to like, now I get why this is happening and the diagnosis came through?
So, yeah, like I say, I think for me it was, I had literally walked into work one day and was pulled into a meeting, and they said, "Look, we want to explore a settlement. We want to explore you maybe taking a step back from this role." And they put down a sort of a sheet of paper in front of me, and I went, "Yep, I'll sign it." I didn't even think. I didn't even take a step back. I just thought, "Yeah, let's sign it." I think I made a joke as well, highly inappropriate. I was just so ready to engage with that. I think part of me was almost relieved at having space, of being able to have that kind of time to process these things. And they were, so unfortunately, they both said, "Take some time, don't just sign it now. Take some time away, have a think." I left work sort of just pretty soon afterwards, and I was heading back home, and um, it was just a brainwave essentially. I'd been on TikTok, you know, leading up to that point, and I'd seen videos of AuADHD. It was still pretty kind of, it wasn't massively common at that point. Um, and yeah, it was. it just all kind of clicked into place for me. Um, and I think me jumping into that conversation, my kind of rashness, my kind of abruptness to sort of say yes, let's sign this and have it over and done with. That kind of awareness of that was a bit silly actually. That was quite abrupt. I shouldn't really have done that. Kind of awareness that I had that I was almost autistic, and then that kind of back of the mind, seeing the ADHD, having a bit more knowledge of that, like I say, everything just kind of fell into place at that point. So I'm turning 34 in 2 weeks' time, and I was 30. I was just about to turn 33 when this happened. So it was about a year ago.
I know when I got my diagnosis, like, and a friend of mine who I met recently had the best description of it. He said, I finally have the blueprints to the house I was living in all my life. Right. And so it was like, yeah, I get myself right now. So what was that experience like? When you got the diagnosis and you had some like explanation for your wiring.
What's interesting is I haven't actually been diagnosed yet.
Okay.
So I spent a lot of time after that doing self-understanding,
Sure.
and in I'm not sure if you're aware, but in the UK, the wait lists for diagnostic criteria are, you're looking
I
at
have heard
two
about that. Yeah.
plus years at a minimum. So for me, I think, and there's arguments to be made around diagnostic
Mm-hmm.
and self-diagnosis, which one is more valid and things like that. For me, that brainwave, that kind of light flicker, it almost was more than enough, because that then prompted the reflection process for me.
Yeah.
I had time, I had space, I didn't have to worry about work for a little while. So I was free to be able to just deep dive, and I was already kind of in that process of doing that from going through therapy. I was already looking back, and, I was developing those reflection skills as it was anyway. So for me, you know, everything just started to make sense. I would look back at, I do have, one of the other reasons why I felt okay with this is I do have family who have been diagnosed.
Okay.
So they have went and they have got their diagnosis, and I don't
Yeah.
have that.
I think what's an important thing there, because there's a lot of people, a number of people in my groups who are also in the same situation and self-diagnosed, haven't gotten the official diagnosis. And I think it's really important. Getting a diagnosis is important in that if you want to pursue like medical treatment, especially through medications, then you kind of need to have the diagnosis in order to get the prescription. Generally, what I see is if the patterns match up for somebody, and they try the things, like some of the things that in my programs like Weekly OS and my ADHD Accelerator program, where they're finding huge value in co-working, they're finding huge value in the tools and systems and techniques, then it's usually, one of those things is like, if it works for you, it makes sense, then it lines up, right? And there's no sense to wait till the diagnosis is official to like start making progress with things.
I completely agree. And I think, what you've touched on there about having the tools and having the support, that's kind of one of the main cornerstones behind Project Fluency.
Mm-hmm.
Having that support, that it's not exclusionary. It doesn't necessarily require, a diagnosis for someone to pick up and use. It meets you where you are. It treats you with the same respect. And, I think,
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us more about Project Fluency, because um, I think it'd be helpful to understand what it actually is and how it works, and what's the download on Project Fluency.
in that time that I had, as I say, when I was kind of going through and reflecting and looking at sort of what kind of support do I need, um, I was utilizing um, ChatGPT quite a bit at that point. There's a bit of mirroring, a bit of body doubling. I'm an external processor, so for me, I really appreciate being able to talk about things with people, and you know with AI. it's that always on, always available support. And I just kind of, I looked at it and I thought, "Oh, if only I could use this to manage my day. If only I could, conversationally say, oh, can you remind me to do X, Y, Z, or can you do this, blah, 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 and it would do that." And that's where the initial idea came from. So for me, it was a case of, looking at, productivity support for one, and then looking at wellness support as a sort of an aside, looking at things like maybe social translation, that sort of stuff. You would need to have three, maybe four plus different apps to cover all of the support that you would get from those areas. And being neurodivergent, you know, you're just not going to do that. It's just not. It's just not feasible. And I think that's where a lot of these apps kind of go wrong. You know, if you just need to help with one aspect, one is fine, but you tend to find that holistically, you need this wider support.
Yeah.
So it just never made sense to me as to why there wasn't an all-in-one app that did everything. And then, started doing some further research and whatnot as well. I came across a really interesting theory called self-determination theory, and it touches on three different things that you need for motivation:
Hmm.
autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And I was looking into, um, common sort of issues with ADHD, and, pathological demand avoidance being one of them. And, I was starting to see that people were referring to it as persistent drive for autonomy instead. And that for me was the sort of the piece into autonomy and support. And okay, well, how do we create a support system that recognizes someone's autonomy? It gives them the competence, and there's a relatedness element in there as well. So, that kind of, that space to be able to do that deep research really kind of birthed the app as it did so far. Um, and yeah, so we're looking at obviously the executive function support, being able to plan, organize, prepare, that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Having um, the well-being support in there, that social translation support in there as well. And we've developed it to a point where um, I feel like I can get it down to three words now: reflect, grow, and connect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are the sort of the main goals here of the app. How can we create a space for people, both, space as a safe space and space as in mental space, so that people can have that energy to reflect. And then once you start reflecting, start understanding yourself, you start then being able to grow. And then once you become confident in yourself, you can then connect with others.
Right.
So that's kind of the sort of the goal here, I guess, moving forward for Project Fluency. We wanted people to become fluent in self-advocacy.
Right.
That's kind of the reason behind the name.
Give me a little bit of a like blow by blow. Like, so if somebody signs up for Project Fluency, what's the first thing that happens for them?
Well, we are still building it at this moment in time. So for me, we're looking at trying to kind of create a user journey. Just look at, I think what we've noticed so far with some people who came on board is there's a lot. There's a lot in the app, and that's obviously by design. We're trying to create that one-stop shop essentially for support. But people were becoming overwhelmed by the sheer choices. So, we want to kind of introduce the concept slowly. We actually took that on board and built a sort of different experience mode. So basic, and a more extensive one, and a full version where you've just got everything in there. Um, for me, my kind of vision with this, I guess, is just to have people logging in on the morning. What do I need to do? Updating their tasks, doing those things, and if they've got questions through the day, kind of being able to go on and get the support as they see fit. But the intention here, I guess, really is that we don't want to keep people trapped in the app. We're designing this for real world connections, giving people the tools and the support. So, some of the development tasks that we have on the app itself are, go and do a thing in real life. Go and do this, come back, and then let's talk about it afterwards. It's that kind of loop
So it
essentially.
sounds like it bakes in not just plan and do, but a reflect cycle, which then it sounds like you can do initially just with the tool itself, but then expand to doing it with other humans.
Yeah, there's something that we're looking at really expanding on living energies. So, I'm a really big personality test guy. I love my MBTI. Um, I'm really big into my astrology, all that sort of stuff as well. Um, one of the ones that really got me was insights and the color profile. So red, green, blue, yellow, and it talked about kind of strengths, weaknesses, and compatibilities with other people. So um, for me, I'm 86% yellow. So I was, an outlier in that session anyway. But the problem with those things is they're static. So you get your MBTI score or you get your insight score, and then it's very much that's it. So for me, well, what do you do next? So the concept of living energies comes in instead. So instead of saying you are one thing or whatever, you have three. And we wanted to kind of build it almost as a skills tree. So, you know, you're not static in these things. If you want to grow or expand into a different type of energy, then you can do that. We want to kind of demystify archetypes almost, as it were. So you have energies, things like visionary, connector, nurturer, that sort of stuff. Universal energies that most people will be able to relate to. And then, okay, well, how do we build upon that? Once again, creating that kind of reflect and grow loop in the sort of the app itself. And then the idea is to then be able to connect with other people. So if you lack the visionary energy, can you connect with someone who has that? And then, develop those skills and relationships that way. How can you maybe then start to emulate that? How can you start to grow that energy yourself? So yeah, so there's that for me is a key part again of the app and you know demystifying growth essentially. Creating a blueprint.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So you've gone from this inside the corporate world to now stepping out as an entrepreneur. So tell me about what was the biggest driver of that decision, and what have you learned so far in your journey?
Yeah, I think the whole um, self understanding, the whole kind of um, the reason to kind of go into this space in the first place, it's all very linked to my own identity, becoming into who I was as a person, and understanding myself. It just kind of felt like the logical next step. Well, I had this idea. I need this support, and if I
Mm-hmm.
need this, then surely other people do as well. And I was having early conversations and kind of developed a bit of an early prototype. Um, and people were saying, I would use this, coming at the concept of, well, I'm building something for me. I'm building the support that I need. So then I can maybe go out and do another HR job, but I won't sort of struggle this time. So, well, actually, if you're building a tool and a system for yourself and other people are saying that they would use this as well, then there's maybe something there. And, what I really appreciated, and I think, I've had people who aren't neurodivergent come up to me and say, "Do I have to be neurodivergent to use this?" I say, "Well, no, of course you don't." Um, I had conversations with a Muslim friend, and she was saying I could use this from a religious perspective. So you start seeing all the kind of the different use cases and all the different potential target audiences, and it really kind of becomes obvious as to this is something here that we could be using moving forward.
Yeah, amazing. So one of the things that I see from the transition from working inside a company to being your own company, creating your own company, is there's the good point of like you get to work on the thing you exactly want to work on, which has high interest to you, right? Well, for an ADHD brain, it's really crucial. It's like two things that get us going: super interesting or super consequential deadline. Uh, and so, but when we're in a corporate structure, while we don't get that part of it, we often get structure, like show up here, do this, right? And when we transition into entrepreneurship, suddenly we don't have that structure. Like we have to structure everything. And I was curious to hear what's been working for you for that transition. Like, have you hit that and seen that? And what have you deployed to like help with like staying on, like figuring out what's important and making it happen and structuring yourself?
In previous corporate roles, I've maybe had too much structure. Um, you know, high pressure roles and things like that. High workload. Get to the end of the week and you're burnt out. Being autistic and ADHD, it's all about balance and finding that sort of middle road. Um, you know, I do love a good Matrix reference, and the one thing that really stuck out to me was the sort of the red pill and the blue pill. Neither are really good options when you think about it. So can we have a middle ground? Can we have a purple pill, and then that kind of developed into the purple path sort of ideology? So for me, yes, I do try and create some structure. Um, you know, I actually had a conversation with a mentor friend who, you know, she recommended just putting in 3 hours per day. Dedicate at least 3 hours to three separate things, and then you've made some progress. If you can work longer than that, I think for me, I've been coding and I've lost hours and hours and hours to coding, and I'm not even a coder to be honest. Picking it up and learning and growing and whatnot. But if I can make sure that I do at least three separate things, and have some structure, but with enough room and availability for spontaneity and a bit of chaos as well, then it creates that sort of sustainable rhythm for me. I think part of the issue with corporate work is it is very same sort of routine, same pattern, and you do get bored. And then obviously going into entrepreneur sort of that kind of environment, there's too much freedom. So you have to create some structure. So yes, as I say, it is creating that kind of that balance. But one of the kind of the best bit of advice I think I could give anybody is just to be kind to yourself on that journey as well. Something I picked up in therapy, they were saying at the guys at the end of every session, he went, be kind to yourself. And it would get to the point where you would say, what am I going to say? And I would say, don't say it. I'm going to flip my lid if you say this. But he would say it, he would say it anyway. He would say it anyway, and it just ingrained into it. Pressure and comparisons are the thieves of joy, aren't they? So, I think, yes, let's create a structure. And I think that's where that 3 hours a day thing really kind of, because you can still see tangible progress from that, but you're also not putting so much pressure on yourself. I need to do, what is it, the 996 kind of hustle culture. That to me is just, I moved out of corporate to avoid that. I don't want to be in that kind of um, exhaustion by the end of the week mentality. So how can I find that balance? And it's going to be different for everybody. But being kind on that journey to yourself is the best bit of advice I think anybody could take on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's huge. Is we like to say it's good to give yourself some grace, and we're not. We generally have our challenge sometimes to do that, but that reminder to be kind to ourselves, to give ourselves grace as we navigate this journey is so important, because each day is going to be a little different, and some days are going to be messy, some days are going to be awesome. But meeting ourselves where we are, and accepting our wonderful brain for exactly what it is and working with it is going to get us so much further, so much farther, than trying to like change it into something it isn't. So if somebody wants to learn more about Project Fluency or what you're doing, how should they go about finding you?
So we do have a website, projectfluency.co.uk. I've linked my LinkedIn profile on there as well. We are starting to ramp up. I'm thinking about doing TikToks. That's how bad it's gotten at this point. Just to kind of get the word out there, get the community out there. I like to think I'm quite open, so if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy for anyone to reach out. But yeah, the app itself currently it is actually free to sign up. We do have paid versions, but for me, the getting the support into the hands of people and making a difference is more important, really. So I want people to be able to utilize this and, feel supported. This came from a place of lack. it came from a place of, well, actually, I don't have the system and the tools to support me. So I turned that into something, as I said at the start, it doesn't exist. Make it yourself, you know? So I naturally want this to be in the hands of as many people as possible, and I want it to be making a difference.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it's been amazing speaking with you today, Ross. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your journey and what you're working on. And it's so great to get to know you. And so yeah, folks, we'll put the links to Project Fluency in the show notes so you guys can access it and check it out. And yeah, I really appreciate you being here, Ross. It's a real pleasure speaking with you. And that's going to wrap it up for this episode of ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator. And we'll see you real soon.